I gave all of my father's money to my wife, my son Ryan said, a smirk on his face as he swirled an expensive glass of champagne. He was standing right there in my cramped, musty living room. He glanced over at my sister, Valerie, and then back at me, genuinely believing I was just a clueless old man who had no idea what was happening. He thought he had won. He honestly believed he had successfully walked away with my life savings, my home, and my dignity. But what he didn't realize was that the woman sitting right next to me wasn't just some confused elderly aunt. She was a retired forensic accountant with 40 years of experience tracking down financial fraud. And he certainly had no clue that the pen in my front pocket was recording every single word coming out of his mouth. That night, I didn't just lose a son, I took my entire life back. But before I tell you exactly how I brought his world crashing down, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Knowing how far my story is traveling brings me an immense amount of comfort. It all started on a freezing Tuesday evening back in November. My name is Martin, and I am 70 years old. For 4 decades, I walked through the security gates at Lockheed Martin every single day, working as a senior aerospace engineer. I spent my career designing guidance systems for satellites orbiting the Earth. The trajectories I calculated had to be precise down to the millimeter. My job was to solve the incredibly complex problems that kept pilots safe in the sky. When I retired, my pension was set at $15,000 a month. By all accounts, I should have been spending my golden years relaxing on the deck of a cruise ship or playing a round of golf on a lush course down in Florida. I was supposed to be sipping fine wine with absolutely nothing to worry about except my golf handicap. Yet there I was, standing in the kitchen of a rundown rental apartment on the outskirts of Phoenix, shivering in the dark. The only light in the room came from a flickering street lamp outside, filtering through a set of filthy blinds and casting long shadows across the floor that looked exactly like prison bars. I pulled my thin wool cardigan tighter around myself, trying to stop my hands from shaking. The window frame was cracked, letting in a bitter, howling draft that bit right through to my skin. I reached out and pulled open the refrigerator door. The little light inside had broken 3 days ago, so I had to squint to see what was left. There was a single container of vanilla yogurt that had expired the previous Tuesday, and a hardened block of cheddar cheese that looked more like a rock than food. That was it. That was the entirety of my rations. I closed the door and turned toward the shaky little table in the center of the room. Under the dim light, a bright red slip of paper sat there, feeling like a heavy threat. It was a final disconnect notice from the power company. I owed them $180, and the deadline was tomorrow at noon. If I didn't pay, the heat, the fridge, and the lights would all be shut off. I pulled out a wooden chair and sank heavily into it, the wood groaning and protesting under my weight. How on earth had things come to this? My wife, Diane, had passed away 2 years ago. We had saved everything. We had completely paid off our family home. We had a highly diversified investment portfolio. I had the kind of pension most people could only dream of. And yet here I was, a man who used to manage multi-million-dollar budgets, trying to calculate whether I could survive the night without any heat. My stomach let out a painful, empty growl that echoed through the quiet room. I was hungry. It wasn't the kind of hunger you feel when you miss lunch, but the deep, gnawing ache of someone who had been rationing food for weeks. I closed my eyes, and pictures from my past began to flood my mind. I saw myself dressed in a sharp suit, shaking hands with military generals. I saw Diane laughing in our beautiful kitchen, the air filled with the wonderful aroma of roasting chicken. I remembered the sheer pride I used to feel whenever I looked at my bank account balance. Then I opened my eyes, and all I saw was the stained linoleum floor of this apartment. Suddenly, a familiar tightness gripped my chest. It started as a dull ache, but quickly intensified into a crushing pain. My heart condition was acting up. I needed my medication. Feeling a wave of dizziness, I stood up and made my way over to the bathroom medicine cabinet. I grabbed the orange prescription bottles for my lisinopril and blood thinners. I gave them a shake. They felt light, far too light. I opened them up and poured the contents into my hand. Nothing but dust. They were completely empty. I had taken my very last pill the previous morning. A cold, hard panic began to wash over me. I needed that medication. Without it, my heart was a ticking time bomb. I rifled through my wallet, but all I found was $3.25 in loose change. That wasn't even enough to buy a bottle of aspirin, let alone prescription heart medication. I had no choice. I had to swallow my pride. I had to beg. With trembling hands, I reached for my old flip phone sitting on the counter and dialed the one number I knew by heart. Ryan, my son, my only child, the financial expert who had promised to take care of everything. I listened to the line ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I prayed he would pick up. I prayed he would hear the desperation in my voice. Then the voicemail kicked in. You've reached Ryan and Megan. We are out living our best life right now. Or maybe on a flight to somewhere absolutely stunning. Leave a message and we'll get back to you when we land. The beep sounded. I held the phone tight against my ears. Tears stung my eyes. Pictures of them flashed through my mind. Ryan in his expensive suits, Megan carrying her designer bags, laughing, drinking, and spending the wealth I spent a lifetime working for, while I stood there in the freezing cold. Ryan, I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking. It's Dad. Ryan, please pick up. Son, I'm hungry. The fridge is completely empty and the power company sent a red notice. They're shutting everything off tomorrow at noon. Ryan, I'm completely out of my heart medication and my chest hurts. Please, son, just call me back. I just need a little bit of my own money. Just enough for food and medicine. Please. I hung up and stared blankly at the screen, desperately hoping it would ring, but it just stayed completely dark. The silence in the apartment felt incredibly heavy. I was completely alone. I was a 70-year-old former senior engineer, a respected man, and I was about to freeze in a dark apartment because my son was too busy living his best life to answer my call. I sat there for a long time as the cold seeped deep into my bones. I thought back to the power of attorney paperwork I had signed. I remembered exactly how Ryan had looked at me and said, Dad, you're grieving for Mom. You shouldn't have to carry the stress of managing bills and taxes right now. Let me handle it. I'm a financial professional. I'll protect your legacy. I trusted him. He was my own flesh and blood. This was the little boy I had taught to ride a bicycle. This was the young man I had put through college. How could he possibly let this happen? The pain in my chest flared up again, sharper this time. I couldn't afford to sit around waiting for a callback anymore. I had to do something. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. My 1998 Ford Taurus was parked out on the street. It was covered in rust, and the engine coughed and sputtered heavily before it finally sputtered to life. I didn't even have enough gas to make it to Ryan's place over in Scottsdale. I barely had enough to get to the grocery store, but I had to try. Maybe my card would work this time. Maybe yesterday was just a system glitch. Maybe Ryan had finally transferred my living allowance. I drove a few miles down the road to the nearest Fry's food grocery store. I didn't dare go to the Whole Foods where Diane and I used to shop. I couldn't even bring myself to look at those prices anymore. I walked down the aisles with my head down, not wanting anyone to look at me. I checked the price of every item. A loaf of bread was $2. A basic can of broth was $1.50. A small jar of peanut butter was $3. I did the math in my head. I picked up the broth and the bread. It wasn't much of a meal, but it would be enough to stop my hands from shaking. I walked over to the checkout line. The cashier was a young girl chewing gum, looking incredibly bored. She scanned my 2 items. "That'll be $3.50, sir," she said without even looking up. I pulled out my debit card. It was the blue card Ryan had given me, the one he told me was for my weekly allowance. I swiped it through the machine. I waited, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing loud in my ears. Please work. Please, just work. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the quiet store. I looked down at the little screen. Transaction declined. My face flushed bright red. A wave of intense shame washed right over me. I think there must be some mistake," I stammered, my voice trembling. Could you try it one more time, please? My son usually transfers the money on Tuesdays. The woman standing directly behind me let out a loud, heavy sigh. She checked her watch and tapped her foot impatiently. Come on, Grandpa. Some of us have places to be. The cashier rolled her eyes, took the card from my hand, wrapped it in a plastic grocery bag, and typed the numbers in manually. Declined, she said loudly this time. Insufficient funds, sir. I froze right where I stood. $3.50. I didn't even have $3.50. I was a man who used to calculate the paths of satellites, and now I couldn't even afford a loaf of bread. I'm sorry, I whispered. I looked down at the broth. I looked at the bread. Part of me wanted to just grab them and run, but I still had my dignity, or at least some small shred of it left. I left the items on the counter, turned around, and walked out of the store with my head down. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, locking me back out in the freezing night. I got back into my car and gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned completely white. Tears streamed down my face. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't some mistake. Ryan was controlling everything, and he was actively starving me. I looked down at the gas gauge. It was sitting right on empty. I probably had just enough gas to go about 20 miles. Ryan's house was 15 miles away. I wiped the tears from my face. I was completely done begging over the phone. I was done leaving voicemails. If my son wanted to ignore me, he was going to have to do it right to my face. I shifted into gear. I was going to Scottsdale. I was going to that mansion that had been paid for with my money. I was going to get some answers, or at least a decent meal. The drive out to Scottsdale took about 40 minutes, and every single mile felt like traveling between two completely different planets. I kept my 1998 Ford Taurus steady on the highway, the engine clicking and coughing every time I tried to accelerate. I watched through my dusty windshield as the landscape slowly transformed. The cracked pavement and chain-link fences of my neighborhood slowly faded away, replaced by smooth, dark asphalt and perfectly manicured desert landscaping. Out here, the street lamps didn't flicker or break. They stood elegantly, casting a warm, golden glow over the palm trees lining the streets. I turned into the gated community where my son lived. I entered the security code at the front gate, my fingers shaking slightly. The code was his wife's birthday. I drove past winding streets lined with homes that looked far more like luxury resorts than actual houses. Finally, I pulled up to the address I knew all too well. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. It was a massive, sprawling modern desert mansion with floor-to-ceiling glass windows and stone walls that practically shimmered in the dark. Ryan and Megan had bought it last year, proudly calling it their dream home. I looked at it, a sick feeling rising in my stomach because I knew exactly whose money had paid for that down payment. Parked right there in the circular driveway was a brand new, pristine white Maserati Ghibli, looking just like a predator waiting to strike. The paint job was flawless, gleaming under the bright porch lights. I parked my rusty, dented Ford directly behind it. The contrast was so sharp it was almost physically painful. My car looked like a pile of scrap metal sitting next to a spaceship. I noticed movement in the front yard. The landscape lighting was fully on, illuminating a beautiful cactus garden. Megan was standing out there with her arms crossed, pointing at a cactus and directing a crew of 3 landscapers who were working overtime. Even though it was nighttime, she was wearing oversized sunglasses and a spotless, snow-white tennis outfit, looking as if she had never dealt with a single drop of sweat or grain of dirt in her life. I turned off my engine, and the car died with a violent shudder. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. "Ryan?" I called out, my voice raspy from crying. "Ryan, get out here right now." Megan pushed her sunglasses down and looked over at me. There wasn't a single ounce of warmth or concern in her eyes. She looked at me the exact same way someone would look at a stray dog that had wandered onto a freshly mowed lawn. "Martin," she said, her voice dripping with sheer annoyance. "What are you doing here? You're scaring the workers." I completely ignored her and walked straight toward the massive front door. Before I could even reach it, the door swung open and Ryan stepped out. He was wearing a perfectly fitted polo shirt and holding an iPad, looking every bit the part of a highly successful professional. "Dad," he said, his brow furrowing, "what's going on? Why are you shouting out in the driveway?" I stopped right in front of him. I was shaking all over, partly from the bitter cold and partly from pure rage. "My card," I said, holding up the useless piece of blue plastic. "I was just at the grocery store, Ryan. A $3.50 transaction was completely declined. I was trying to buy broth and bread, and the power company sent a disconnection notice. They are shutting off my lights tomorrow at noon." Ryan let out a sigh. It was a long, dramatic sigh, the kind a parent gives a toddler throwing a tantrum. He stepped down the stairs and placed a hand on my shoulder, gently steering me away from the workers and his wife. "Dad, Dad, just calm down," he said, his voice smooth and incredibly practiced. "You're overreacting. I've explained this to you before. The market is incredibly volatile right now. We moved your liquid funds into secure trust funds. They have lockup periods. It's for your own protection. We can't just withdraw cash whenever we want." "Protection?" I asked, my voice rising. "I'm actively starving, Ryan. I'm freezing. I don't even have my heart medication left. What kind of protection is that?" He looked around nervously, clearly terrified that the landscapers might be watching. "It's just a banking glitch," he said, completely waving away my suffering. "Transfers take some time to clear. Look, consider it handled." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was made of genuine alligator skin. I recognized the brand. It cost more than my entire food budget for the past month. He opened it up, and I could see it was stuffed full of cash. Crisp, brand new bills. He pulled out 5 $100 bills and pressed them into my hand. "Here," he said. "This one's on me. I forgot to manually transfer your weekly allowance. Take this. Go get yourself something to eat. I will personally call the electric company first thing tomorrow morning. It's all taken care of. See? Everything is completely under control." I looked down at the money in my hands. $500. It felt incredibly heavy, and it felt dirty. This was my money. This was the money I had earned through 40 years of complex calculations, immense stress, and early mornings. And now my own son was handing it back to me like an allowance, like some form of charity. Megan walked over, a Chanel bag swinging from her shoulder. I recognized that bag. I knew for a fact it was worth $7,000. Because a few months ago, right before Ryan stopped showing me my statements, I had spotted a similar charge on the account. "Martin, honestly," she said, forcing a tight, fake smile that didn't even come close to reaching her eyes, "bursting in like this, you almost gave Ryan a heart attack. We are working so incredibly hard to protect your legacy. Don't you even remember signing the power of attorney?" My mind instantly flashed back to the funeral 2 years ago. The grief back then had felt like a thick fog, so dense I couldn't even see my own hands. I had been completely broken. Ryan had laid a stack of documents right out on the kitchen table. "Just sign this, Dad," he had said so gently. "I'll take care of the taxes, the bills, and the investments. You just focus on grieving. You just rest. Mom would want you to rest." And so I signed it. I didn't read a single line. I trusted him completely. He was my son. He was the only piece of Diane I had left. "I remember," I said weakly. "Exactly," Megan said, nodding along as if she were speaking to a slow child. "So just go on home. Get some rest. Let the experts handle the financial stuff. Ryan will take care of the electric bill." She turned her back to me and began typing away on her phone. Ryan gave my shoulder one final pat before looking back down at his iPad. "Go get a nice dinner, Dad," he said absent-mindedly. "We'll catch up later." I stood there for a moment in the driveway of the fortress, built entirely with my money. I looked at the Maserati. I looked at my son and his wife. They had already forgotten I was even in the room. To them, I wasn't a father anymore. I was just a problem to manage, an annoying distraction they could throw cash at to make go away. "Fine," I whispered under my breath. "Fine." I turned around and walked back to my rusty Ford Taurus. I climbed inside, tossed that $500 onto the passenger seat, and just sat there. I felt so incredibly small. I felt so incredibly foolish. But as I drove away and passed through the security gates, a tiny voice started whispering in the back of my mind. He's a financial professional, I tried to tell myself. He knows more about this than I do. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. It was a cold, tiny seed sitting deep in my chest, right next to my aching heart. Driving back into the darkness of my neighborhood, I knew deep down that $500 wasn't going to fix a single thing that had been broken. The week that followed was a slow, painful slide into absolute rock bottom. The $500 Ryan had shoved into my hand, that stack of cash that felt so heavy and dirty, evaporated faster than water on a scorching Arizona highway. I immediately spent most of it just to make the minimum payment on the electric bill so the lights would stay on. The rest disappeared into gas for the car, cheap groceries, and a $10 replacement part for a leaking pipe under my sink. By Tuesday morning, my wallet was completely empty again. I was right back to zero. And then, in the dead of night, the inevitable happened. It started as a dull, heavy pressure right in the middle of my chest, like a massive stone pressing down hard on my ribs. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was just heartburn from the cheap canned soup I'd eaten. But then that stone turned into a vice. The pressure became a sharp, crushing pain that radiated down my left arm and traveled all the way up into my jaw. I sat up in bed, gasping for air, clutching my chest. My heart was racing wildly, like a trapped bird throwing itself against a cage. I knew this feeling all too well. I had lived with this condition for years. This was my heart giving out. I stumbled into the bathroom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely flip the light switch. I reached into the medicine cabinet for my prescriptions. The lisinopril was there, a cheap generic blood pressure medication. But the other bottle, the crucial life-saving blood thinner that kept clots from forming and kept my heart from stopping, was completely empty. I stared at that amber plastic bottle. It was just a tiny piece of plastic, but at that moment, it was the only thing standing between me and the grave. I needed a refill. I needed it immediately. I grabbed my keys and drove to a 24-hour pharmacy. The drive was a blur of absolute agony and sheer terror. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every breath was a massive struggle. I parked haphazardly and walked into the bright, freezing lights of the pharmacy, handing the empty bottle over to the pharmacist. He was a tired-looking young man with glasses. "I need a refill," I gasped out, leaning heavily against the counter just to stay upright. "Please, it's an emergency." He tapped a few keys on his computer. "All right, Mr. Vance. We have it in stock. Your total comes to $280. $280. It might as well have been $1 million. I pulled out my debit card, that same blue card that had failed me at the grocery store. I prayed. I closed my eyes and begged whatever universe would listen to a foolish old man, that Ryan had remembered to make the transfer, that he found it in his heart to care. I swiped the card. The machine let out a harsh, mocking electronic rejection beep. Transaction declined. I stared at the screen, the letters blurring before my eyes. "Please try it again," I pleaded, my voice sounding weak and thin. "Please, my son handles my finances. There has to be money in there." The pharmacist sighed and ran it a second time. "Declined. Insufficient funds, sir." I looked at him, then looked at the bottle in his hand. "That bottle is my life, sir," I said, tears finally welling up in my eyes. "My chest hurts so badly. I need that medicine. Can you bill me later? Can you just give me a few pills to get through the night? I worked at Lockheed Martin for 40 years. I'm good for the money, I promise." The pharmacist looked at me with genuine pity, but he shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't do that. The system won't let me dispense medication without payment. It's a controlled inventory. There's nothing I can do." He placed the bottle back on the shelf behind him. It sat right there, barely 6 feet away, completely out of my reach. I walked out of the pharmacy with absolutely nothing. The cool night air hit my face, but I was sweating through my clothes. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the intense pain. And then a thought hit me. It was a cold, terrifying realization that washed over me, leaving me feeling entirely frozen. Ryan knew I needed this medication. He knew exactly what it cost. He knew my schedule. He had all of my medical records, and he was purposely keeping the accounts empty. Why? The answer became crystal clear. Those trust funds, those complicated financial structures he kept talking about. If I was alive, he had to jump through hoops to access them. He had to keep up the act. He had to pay for my life. But if I was gone, the estate would settle. The trust funds would unlock. As his father's sole heir, everything would transfer to him instantly. No more questions. No more annoying phone calls from an old man. Just millions of dollars landing cleanly in his pocket. My son wasn't just bad with money. He was waiting for me to die. He was betting on it. He was helping it happen. I felt a chill run down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with my heart condition. I was looking at the actions of someone trying to end my life, and the weapon wasn't a gun or a knife. It was a declined debit card. It was intentional neglect. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. I dialed Ryan's number. It rang straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail, I dialed a third time, then a fourth. I called him 20 times in a row. I was screaming inside. Answer the phone. Answer it and tell me I'm wrong. Answer it and tell me you care. Answer it and save my life. But all I got was silence. The digital silence of a son erasing his father. I sat there in that dark parking lot, the pain in my chest, throbbing in perfect rhythm with my despair. I was going to die right here. I was going to die alone and penniless in a 1998 Ford Taurus, while my son slept soundly in a mansion I paid for. No! I slammed my hand against the dashboard. No! I wasn't going to let him off that easily. I wasn't going to let him win without a fight. I scrolled through my contacts. There weren't many people left, but there was one name I had avoided for months, a name Ryan had spent years poisoning my mind against. Valerie, my sister. She lived over in Denver. She was a retired CPA. She was sharp, demanding, and possessed a tongue as sharp as a whip. Ryan absolutely loathed her. "Dad, don't talk to Aunt Val," he had told me 100 times. "She's toxic. She's jealous of our success. She just wants to make you doubt me. She's a bitter old woman." I had believed him. Just to keep the peace, I cut her off. I allowed him to isolate me. But now, looking at the dark screen of my phone, I realized exactly why he hated her. He didn't hate her because she was toxic. He hated her because she was brilliant. He hated her because she could see right through him. I pressed the call button. It was incredibly late, well past midnight. She probably wouldn't answer. She had every right to be angry with me for ignoring her for so long. The phone rang once, then twice. "Martin!" Her voice was crisp, alert. She answered so fast it was like she had been waiting by the phone. "Valerie," I gasped out. "Martin, you sound awful. What's wrong? Is it your heart?" I started crying. I couldn't stop it anymore. The levee broke. "Val," I sobbed. I'm in trouble. Talk to me, Martin. What happened?" I'm at the pharmacy. My card was declined. I need my blood thinners. My chest hurts, Val. I called Ryan. I called him 20 times. He won't answer." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence completely different from Ryan's. It was the silence of a protector assessing a threat. "He took your money," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, he took everything. The power of attorney, the accounts, all of it. He says it's invested. But I have nothing, Val. I'm starving." I heard movement on the other end of the line, the sound of shifting weight, sheets moving, feet hitting the floor. "Martin, listen to me," she said, her voice turning as cold and solid as steel. "Do not call him again. Do not let him know you spoke to me. I don't know what to do. Send me your exact location right now. Use the GPS on your phone." "Why?" "Because I'm coming to get you. But you're in Denver. I'm heading to the airport. I'll be on the first flight to Phoenix." "Val, you don't have to—" "Be quiet, Martin. Send me the address. If you have any spare change, buy some aspirin. Chew them up. Sit in your car and lock the doors." She paused, her voice shaking with an intense emotion. "Don't you dare leave this world on me, Martin. Do you hear me? Don't you dare let that little parasite win." I sent her the location and put the phone down. I chewed 2 aspirin I managed to find in the glove box. For the first time in months, as I sat in the dark, waiting for my sister, I felt a tiny spark that wasn't fear. It was anger, and that anger was the exact thing that kept me alive. The 4 hours I spent waiting for my sister were the longest hours of my life. I sat in that pitch-black apartment, listening to the wind rattle the loose window pane, watching the shadows stretch and then slowly recede as the first gray light of morning crept across the floor. The sharp, biting pain in my chest had settled into a heavy, rhythmic throb thanks to the aspirin, but the fear remained. I was terrified that she wouldn't show up, or worse, that she would walk in, see this complete disaster, and turn around in disgust. I looked around at the stained walls, the peeling linoleum, and that single shaky chair that made up all my furniture. This was the kingdom of a man who had spent 40 years looking at the stars, a sad, broken little box on the edge of the desert. At 6 in the morning, a black car pulled up to the curb outside. It wasn't a regular taxi. It was a high-end luxury sedan, sleek and gleaming, looking completely ridiculous on my broken-down street. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. And there she was, Valerie. She stepped onto the dusty pavement looking like a queen arriving in a war zone. She was 68 years old, but she stood straighter than people half her age. She wore a charcoal gray business suit that looked tailored in Italy, despite the fact that she had just flown across the country in the middle of the night. Her silver hair was pulled back into a sharp, elegant bun, and she held a heavy, expensive-looking leather briefcase. She didn't look like a retired aunt coming for a family visit. She looked like a general preparing to take over a failing battlefield. I unlocked the door and stepped outside, shivering in the early morning air. When her eyes landed on me, her stride faltered for a fraction of a second. I knew exactly what she saw. She saw the ghost of her brother. She saw the hollow cheeks, the pale gray skin, and the clothes hanging loosely off my frame because I had lost 20 pounds in 6 months. "Martin," she said softly. I tried to smile, but my lips just trembled. "Val?" I said. She didn't instantly hug me. Instead, she walked straight up to me, placed her hands on my shoulders, and gripped me tightly, as if she were checking to make sure I was actually real, or that I wouldn't crumble under her touch. Her sharp blue eyes scanned my face, taking in every single line of stress, every sign of neglect. Then, without a word, she pulled me into a fierce embrace. It only lasted for a moment, but in that moment, I felt a sense of strength I hadn't felt since Diane passed away. Then she stepped back, her face hardening into a mask of pure determination. "Let's go inside," she said. I led her into the apartment. Part of me wanted to stop her. I wanted to shield her eyes. I didn't want her to see the absolute shame I was living in. But she walked right past me, the heels of her boots clicking sharply against the dirty floor. She stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly in a circle, taking everything in. She looked at the water stains on the ceiling. She looked at the mattress sitting directly on the floor in the corner, the frame long gone because I had sold it 3 months ago just to buy groceries. She looked at the bright red disconnect notice still sitting on the table. She walked over to the kitchen area. It was barely a kitchen, just a sink and a tiny humming refrigerator. She pulled the door open. The sour smell of old food drifted out. She stared at that single container of expired yogurt and the block of cheese. She picked up the yogurt, looked at the date, and set it back down with a slow, deliberate movement. Then she turned around to face me. I expected tears. I expected pity. But Valerie had been a forensic accountant for 40 years. She dealt strictly in facts, numbers, and accountability. There were no tears in her eyes. There was only a cold, terrifying fury. "Martin," she said, her voice low and steady, "you worked at Lockheed Martin for 40 years. You were a senior engineer. Your pension is $15,000 a month. That's $180,000 a year, net." I nodded, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "So tell me," she continued, her voice rising just enough to cut through the air like a knife, "why are you living like an absolute pauper? Why is my brother, a man who designed guidance systems for the military, starving in a room that isn't even fit for an animal?" Ryan said, I started weakly. Ryan said he was investing it. He said the market was down. He said he had to put it in trust to avoid taxes. Investing? She spat the word out like it was venom. Investing doesn't involve starving the investor, Martin. Investing means growth. This isn't investing. This is liquidation. He isn't managing your assets. He's stripping you down. She walked over to the table, swept the disconnect notice to the side, and placed her leather briefcase down, snapping the locks open. The sound cracked through the small room. She pulled out a sleek silver laptop and a mobile hotspot device. "Sit down, Martin," she commanded. I sat in the shaky chair. She pulled over a second chair, a folding one I kept in the closet, and sat right next to me. She opened the laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I need access to your accounts," she said. "The Chase private client account, right? That's where you and Diane kept the bulk of your savings." "Yes," I said. "Username and password," she demanded. I don't know them," I admitted, a wave of shame heating my face all over again. "Ryan changed them. He said it was for security. He said it was too dangerous for me to manage online banking. He said I might get scammed." Valerie stopped typing. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Her expression was completely unreadable, which was far scarier than her anger. "He changed your passwords," she repeated flatly, "to protect you from getting scammed." "Yes." "Martin," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "the scam isn't online. The scam is sitting in a Scottsdale mansion driving a Maserati. He locked you out so you couldn't see what he was taking." She pulled out her phone. It wasn't even 7 in the morning yet. She scrolled through her contacts and hit a button, placing the phone on speaker right on the table between us. It rang for a long time. Finally, a groggy, annoyed voice answered. "Hello?" It was Ryan. "Ryan, it's your Aunt Valerie," she said. There was a long pause on the other end, the sound of rustling sheets, and then Ryan's voice completely shifted. It became smooth, fake, the voice of a salesman caught off guard. "Aunt Val, wow, it's early. Is everything okay? Haven't heard from you in forever. Dad said you were traveling." "Cut the act, Ryan," Valerie said. Her tone wasn't warm. It was purely professional and absolutely lethal. "I am sitting in the kitchen of your father's Phoenix apartment. I am looking at an empty refrigerator and a power disconnect notice. I am looking at a man with a 7-figure net worth who can't even afford his heart medication." Dead silence fell over the line, a heavy, suffocating silence. "Aunt Val, you don't understand," Ryan stammered, that smooth exterior completely vanishing. "Dad's getting confused. He forgets things. I just gave him cash last week. He's just mismanaging it himself. The market is incredibly complex right now, and I've moved the assets into a liquid, long-term vehicles." Valerie let out a dry, sharp laugh. "Don't use those industry buzzwords with me, boy," she said. "I was auditing Fortune 500 companies while you were still in diapers. Illiquid assets don't explain why his checking account is completely empty. Now listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once." I watched my sister in absolute awe. She sat in that chair, yet she seemed completely towering. "I want the login credentials for every single account tied to Martin's social security number. I want the Chase accounts, the brokerage accounts, and the pension portal. And I want the PDF statements for the last 24 months sent to my secure email address." "Valerie, I can't just hand those over to you," Ryan said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "There are privacy laws. I have power of attorney. I have a fiduciary duty to protect Dad's privacy, even from family." "Fiduciary duty," Valerie repeated. "You want to talk about fiduciary duty? Excellent. Let's talk about the law. In the state of Arizona, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a Class 2 felony. It carries mandatory prison time. If I don't see those statements in my inbox in 10 minutes, Ryan, and I mean 10 minutes, I won't be calling the bank. I'll be calling the Phoenix Police Department and Adult Protective Services. I will file formal charges for elder abuse and grand theft, and I will have them audit every single dollar you've spent over the last 2 years." I held my breath. I had never heard anyone speak to Ryan that way. He was always the one in control, the one who made everyone else feel small. "You wouldn't," Ryan whispered. "He's my dad. Try me. Valerie said. You have 9 minutes. She hung up the phone. Her hand was perfectly steady. She looked over at me, her expression softening just a fraction for the very first time. He's terrified, Martin, she said calmly. People who manage money correctly don't get terrified when an accountant asks to see the books. They might get annoyed, but never terrified. He is absolutely shaking right now. Why? I asked, even though I was terrified of the answer. Because he knows I'm going to find everything, she said, turning back to her laptop. And he knows that once I see those numbers, his life is over. We sat in absolute silence, watching the digital clock in the corner of her screen tick down. 8 minutes. 7 minutes. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. Part of me, some foolish, desperate part of me, wanted him to call her bluff, to prove he was innocent, to show that this was all just a massive misunderstanding. But the other part of me, the part that had been starving and freezing for months, wanted him to be afraid. Right at the 6-minute mark, Valerie's laptop let out a sharp chime. An email had arrived. The subject line read, Statements. She clicked it open and downloaded the first file. Adjusting her glasses, she leaned in close to the screen, her eyes darting rapidly across the rows of figures. I watched her face carefully. I saw her brow furrow deeply. I saw her lips tighten into a thin, pale line. She let out a breath that was half a sigh, half a growl. What is it? I asked. He's even stupider than I thought, she muttered. Martin, look at this. She turned the laptop toward me. It was a spreadsheet with rows and columns of numbers. This is an Excel file, she said, tapping the screen. He typed this out himself. These aren't official bank records at all. Look at the formatting. Look at the font. He fabricated this entire thing to try and cover up where the money actually went. She slammed the laptop shut with a sharp snap. He thinks we're idiots, she said, standing up and straightening her blazer. He thinks he can just throw a spreadsheet at me and I'll go away. She reached for her phone once more. Where are we going? I asked. We're going to the bank, she said. We are going to walk right into a branch, and we are going to get the real statements. And then, Martin, we are going to burn his little kingdom to the ground. But first, you need to eat something. She reached into her purse and handed me a protein bar. Eat this, she commanded. You're going to need your strength. It's going to be an incredibly long day. I took the protein bar. I looked at my sister, standing there in my dirty kitchen like an avenging angel. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel completely alone. I felt a tiny spark of something I thought had died along with my bank account. I felt hope. Valerie stared at her laptop screen with pure disgust. She didn't even bother printing out the file Ryan had sent. She just pointed a manicured finger at the glowing spreadsheet. This is insulting, she said, her voice low and dangerous. He honestly thinks he can send me a typed list of numbers, and I'll just nod and walk away. Look at this, Martin. No bank logo, no transaction codes, just rows of perfectly even numbers. He's claiming your portfolio still has $1.2 million in it. She snapped the laptop shut. We're done playing his game. We're going straight to the source. She took my phone and dialed the number on the back of my useless debit card. It was the direct line for Chase Private Client. I used to have a personal banker there, a kind woman named Sarah, but I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years because Ryan told me she had transferred to a different branch. The automated system picked up, and Valerie flew through the menus with the speed of a concert pianist. Finally, a real voice came over the line. Chase Private Client, this is Jonathan. How can I help you today? I need to access the account of Martin Vance, Valerie said, her voice crisp and authoritative. I'm sitting with the account holder right now. I'm handing the phone over to him. She pressed the device into my hand. My palms were sweating so much I almost dropped it. Hello, I said, my voice shaking. This is Martin Vance. Hello, Mr. Vance, Jonathan said. For security purposes, I need to verify your identity. Can you please state your full social security number? I gave it to him. Thank you. Now, I need you to answer the security question on file. What was the name of your mother's first pet? I froze. My mother absolutely detested animals. She had never owned a pet in her entire life. I don't believe she ever had one, I stammered. I'm sorry, sir. That is the question on file. I looked at Valerie, panic rising fast in my throat. Ryan changed it, I whispered. Try Megan's dog, Valerie hissed under her breath, or the hamster Ryan had when he was 10. Try Buster, I told him. Incorrect, the voice on the line replied. Try Snickers? Incorrect. Sir, you have one final attempt before this account is locked out for 24 hours. I felt like I was drowning. My own life, my own history, was locked behind a wall I couldn't climb. Ryan hadn't just taken my money. He had completely rewritten my identity and locked me out of it. Valerie snatched the phone right out of my hand. Listen to me, Jonathan, she said, her voice dropping into a tone that could make a grown man freeze in his tracks. My name is Valerie Vance. I am a retired CPA, and I am recording this call. We suspect identity theft and elder financial abuse. The reason Mr. Vance cannot answer the security questions is because his power of attorney, the actual suspect in this fraud case, changed the answers to lock him out. She didn't even pause. Now, you are going to verify his identity another way. You are going to use out-of-wallet credit history questions. Ask him about his previous addresses. Ask him for his late wife's date of birth. Ask him for the make and model of the first car he ever financed. Do it right now, or I will have a subpoena sitting on your supervisor's desk before noon. A long, heavy silence fell over the line. I could hear Jonathan typing frantically on his keyboard. Please hold, he said, his voice incredibly tight. The next 30 minutes were a high-stress blur. They transferred us to a supervisor and then over to the fraud department. I had to answer questions about a mortgage I had paid off back in 1995. I had to recall the exact street number of the house I grew up in. I had to verify the precise date Diane passed away. It was agonizing. It felt exactly like an interrogation. Sweat soaked straight through my thin shirt, and my heart raced wildly against my ribs. Finally, the tone on the other end completely changed. Thank you, Mr. Vance. Your identity has been verified. We have reset your access. What information can we provide for you today? Valerie put the phone on speaker and set it down gently on the table between us. She grabbed a pen and a notepad from her bag. We need the current balance on the primary retirement investment account, she said, the one valued at $800,000 2 years ago. I held my breath. I remembered that number perfectly. 800,000. That was the nest egg Diane and I had spent 40 years building. It was our safety net, our freedom. I heard the sound of keys tapping. The current balance on that investment account is $2,142.16. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the table just to keep myself from falling out of the chair. Repeat that, Valerie said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. $2,142. It was gone. All of it. 40 years of early mornings and late nights. 40 years of saving. Completely gone. And the checking account? Valerie asked, writing the numbers down on her pad, pressing the pen so hard it dug into the paper. Exactly $150. I felt like I'd been kicked right in the stomach. I wanted to throw up. That was why the card had been declined. That was why I couldn't afford my medicine. All right, Valerie said. Now I need you to read back the transactions for the last 12 months. Where did the money go? We're looking for recurring large-sum transfers. One moment. Okay, I see a recurring monthly transfer that was set up 18 months ago. Go on. On the first of every month, $50,000 was wired to an external commercial account. What is the name of that commercial account? Valerie asked. M&R Investments, LLC. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. A secondary transfer on the 15th of every month. $25,000. To whom? It's flagged as a consulting fee. The recipient is listed as Megan Vance. A dead silence fell over my kitchen, heavier than a grave. I stared at the peeling paint on the wall, completely unable to look my sister in the eye. Megan Vance, Valerie repeated. Consulting fees? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Freeze all of these accounts immediately. Not a single penny moves in or out without voice authorization from Martin Vance. Do you understand me? Yes, ma'am, it's done. Valerie hung up the phone. She leaned back in her chair, staring down at the notepad. She didn't say a word for a very long time. She just stared at the numbers she had written down. $50,000 a month to M&R. $25,000 a month to Megan. I felt my legs give out. I slid out of the chair and collapsed right onto the dirty linoleum floor. pulling my knees up to my chest. I felt cold, freezing cold. M&R, I whispered. Valerie looked down at me, her face completely pale. Megan and Ryan, she said. It was so simple, so incredibly arrogant. They hadn't even tried to hide it. They named the shell company after themselves. They slapped their initials on the very thing that destroyed me, like monogramming a set of towels. He stole it, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a complete stranger. He took everything. The house money, the retirement, the stocks. He didn't just steal it, Martin, Valerie said, dropping to her knees right next to me. He funneled it. He was paying his wife a salary out of your life savings, a $25,000 a month consulting fee. What could Megan possibly consult on? Shopping. She reached out and took my hand. He emptied you out, Martin. He looked you in the eye, told you he was protecting you, and then he completely ruined you. I closed my eyes. I saw Ryan as a baby, sleeping in my arms. I saw him graduating from college, smiling in his cap and gown. I saw him at his wedding, raising a glass to me and Diane. I gave him everything, I sobbed. I paid for his school. I bought his first car. I put down the deposit on his first house. I loved him. I loved him more than my own life. And he repaid you by leaving you in the dark to fade away, Valerie said. She wasn't trying to comfort me. She was trying to make me strong. She was pouring concrete straight into my spine. Look at me, Martin. I opened my eyes. You aren't a father anymore. At least not to him. You are the victim of a crime. You were robbed. The person who did this is not your son. He's a predator, and M&R Investments was his weapon. She stood up and held her hand down to me. Get up. We are nowhere near done. We have the numbers now. We know where the money went. Now we need to find out what they bought with it. Because a person doesn't just lose $1.5 million into thin air. You wear it, you drive it, or you live in it. I took her hand and pulled myself up. My legs were still shaking, but I stood firm. The shock was beginning to fade, replaced by a dull, aching clarity. M&R, I repeated. Megan and Ryan. I had raised a snake. I had kept it warm against my chest, protected it, fed it, and the very moment I was weak, the moment Diane was gone and I was vulnerable, it bit me. Valerie grabbed her notepad and tore the page out. We have the proof, she said. Now let's build the case. Grab your coat, Martin. We're going to see a lawyer. I took one last look at that empty refrigerator. I looked at the red disconnect notice. I looked at the poverty my son had forced upon me, all while paying his wife $25,000 a month to consult on how to spend my money. I grabbed my coat. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain this time. It was the slow, hot burn of pure anger. Let's go, I said. Valerie didn't take me back to my apartment. She said that place was a crime scene and that a victim shouldn't have to sleep in the middle of a crime scene. Instead, she drove us straight to a hotel suite in downtown Phoenix. It wasn't a palace, but compared to the slum I had been living in, it felt like the Ritz-Carlton. There were clean sheets that smelled like lavender, a kitchenette with a working refrigerator, and most importantly, actual working heat. The first thing Valerie did was take me to the pharmacy. She didn't ask about the price. She just handed her credit card to the pharmacist and paid the $280 for my blood thinners. She bought me vitamins. She bought me protein shakes. She bought me a new toothbrush. When I took that first dose, when I felt that tiny pill that kept my heart beating slide down my throat, I felt a wave of relief, so powerful I almost collapsed right there in the aisle. That was the taste of survival. Next, she took me to a department store. She looked at my clothes, that tattered cardigan, the pants that were 3 sizes too big because I had been starving, and she shook her head. We are going to war, Martin, she said, and soldiers need a uniform. She bought me a sharp, dark blue suit. She bought me crisp, white shirts. She bought me polished black leather shoes. When I looked at myself in the dressing room mirror, I didn't see a broken old man begging for soup money anymore. I saw Martin Vance, senior aerospace engineer. I saw the man I used to be. I straightened my tie and felt something click right back into place inside my chest. The shame was evaporating. In its place was a cold, hard determination. We turned that hotel suite into a war room. Valerie set up her laptop at the dining table. lining up her notepad and pens perfectly. She called room service and ordered enough food to feed an army. Then she made a phone call. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. A woman walked in with a jawline that looked sharp enough to cut glass. She was in her late 50s, wearing a professional suit that cost more than my car, and carrying a leather briefcase. Her eyes didn't miss a single detail. Valerie introduced her as Ms. Shaw, a forensic attorney who specialized in high-stakes financial fraud. This wasn't the kind of lawyer you hired to write a will. This was the kind of lawyer you hired to dismantle someone. Ms. Shaw didn't waste time with small talk. She sat down, opened her briefcase, and pulled out a laptop. Valerie had already filled her in on the situation over the phone. Ms. Shaw looked at me and said, "Mr. Vance, I'm going to run a comprehensive credit check against your Social Security number. We need to see exactly how deep this rot goes." She typed away for a few minutes. The room was completely quiet, except for the click of her keyboard and the hum of the air conditioner. I sat there in my new suit, feeling like a defendant waiting for a verdict. Suddenly, Ms. Shaw stopped typing. She leaned back in her chair and took off her glasses, looking at me with an expression that was a mix of pity and professional outrage. "Mr. Vance," she said, "do you own an American Express Centurion card?" I frowned. I didn't even know what that was. "No," I said. "I only have a debit card, the blue one." Ms. Shaw turned the laptop around so I could see the screen. "No, Mr. Vance," she said. "You have 3 American Express Centurion cards. They are commonly known as the Black Card. They are invite-only, reserved for the ultra-wealthy. And according to this credit report, they were opened in your name 18 months ago." I stared at the screen. Active, active, active. 3 black cards with virtually limitless credit. Valerie stood up, walked over behind me, and looked over my shoulder. "Pull the statements," she commanded. "I want to see the spending." Ms. Shaw navigated through the digital records, downloading the transaction history for the past year. The printer in the corner of the room whined to life, starting to spit out pages. 1 page, 2 pages, 10 pages, 50 pages. It just kept printing. The sound was rhythmic and sickening, like a heartbeat counting down to a disaster. Valerie picked up the thick, warm stack of paper, handing half of it over to me. "Read, Martin," she said. "See what your son was doing while you sat in the dark?" I looked at the first page, my eyes widening. Chanel Scottsdale, $12,000. I recognized the bag, the black quilted one that had been swinging from Megan's shoulder last night when she told me to go home. She had been standing in that driveway with $12,000 of my money hanging off her arm while I was begging for food. I looked at the next line. Emirates Airlines, first class. 2 tickets, $20,000. The date was 6 months ago. I remembered that exact week. I had called Ryan because my water heater had broken down, and he told me he was in Dubai for a business conference, claiming the stress was immense and that he was working hard for the family. He and Megan had flown first class to Dubai on my dime. They stayed at the Burj Al Arab. I saw the charge, $5,000 a night. While I was boiling water on a hot plate just to wash my face, they were sleeping in a desert palace. I turned the page. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. Not anymore. Aspen Ski Resort, $8,000. Michelin star dining in Napa Valley, $3,000 for a single dinner. Tiffany and Company, $15,000. Page after page, a record of sheer indulgence and greed. They weren't just living off my money, they were feasting on it. They were living like royalty, like celebrities, and they had done it all using my name. And then I saw it. A recurring charge that appeared on the statement like clockwork on the first of every single month. Maserati Financial Services. Lease payment, $2,200. The room seemed to tilt. I closed my eyes and was right back in that Scottsdale driveway. I saw that white car gleaming under the porch lights, the car that looked like a shark, the one blocking my rusty Ford Taurus. Ryan had walked right past it without a second glance. To him, it was just a toy. I opened my eyes and looked at Valerie. "The car," I whispered. "The white Maserati in his driveway." Valerie nodded slowly, her face dark. "You're paying for it, Martin. You leased a supercar for your son while you drove a death trap." I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the lights of Phoenix. I felt a profound shift happening deep inside my body. For months, I had been filled with nothing but grief. Grief for Diane and terror for my own survival. I had felt weak, like a victim. But as I looked out at those lights, that sadness completely evaporated, burned away by a searing heat that started in my gut and spread all the way to my fingertips. It was anger, but it wasn't a wild, chaotic rage. It was the cold, calculated anger of an engineer who had found a flaw in a system and was fully prepared to fix it. I turned back to face the room. Ms. Shaw and Valerie were both watching me. "He bought a watch," I said, pointing to a line on the paper. "A Rolex Daytona, $25,000. I saw it on his wrist. He told me it was a knockoff. He told me he bought it for $50 on Canal Street in New York. He made a joke out of it. He was laughing at me." Valerie said, "He was laughing at you every single day, Martin. He thought you were a joke. He saw you as a resource to be mined until you were completely dry and then thrown away." I walked back to the table and picked up the stack of statements. $250,000 in 18 months, plus the cash transfers, plus the pension. "He isn't my son," I said. My voice was completely level, sounding a bit strange to my own ears, deeper and far stronger. "The person who did this is a stranger. He's a thief who happens to look like my son." Ms. Shaw looked at me with a newfound respect. "So what do you want to do, Mr. Vance?" I took one final look at the statements, at the Chanel charge, the Maserati charge, and the Napa Valley dinner. "I want to ruin him," I said. "I don't just want my money back. I want to take absolutely everything. I want him to feel exactly what I felt. I want him to stand in the dark, wondering if he's going to survive the night. I'm going to strip away every single thing he bought with my name." Valerie smiled, a tiny, tight smile, but it was the first sign of satisfaction she had shown since she arrived. "Good," she said. "Then let's get to work. We have the paper trail. Now we need his confession." Ms. Shaw pulled out a fresh legal notepad. "We could sue him," she said. "We could file a civil suit, but he has the power of attorney. He will argue that you authorized these expenses. He will claim you wanted him to have the car and the trips. He'll say you were being generous, or he'll say you were confused and forgot. In a courtroom, it'll be your word against his legal documents. It could drag on for years." "I don't have years," I said. "Exactly," Valerie agreed, "which is why we aren't going to court just yet. We're going to set a trap. We're going to make him admit it himself. We're going to make him say it out loud in front of witnesses." "How?" I asked. Valerie leaned forward, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "You're going to throw a party, Martin. A celebration. You're going to invite him over. You're going to play the grateful, aging, confused father one last time. You're going to feed his ego until it bursts. And when he feels completely safe, when he thinks he's absolutely untouchable, we're going to take him down." I looked at my sister, then at the lawyer, and down at the dark blue suit I was wearing. "I'm ready," I said. "Tell me what to do." The atmosphere in the room completely shifted. This wasn't a hotel suite anymore. It was a command center, and I wasn't a retired engineer waiting to die. I was a hunter. For the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly where my prey was. Ms. Shaw's phone suddenly buzzed against the mahogany table, cutting through the silence of the room like a gunshot. The sharp, abrupt sound startled all of us. She looked at the displaying number and held up a hand, signaling for us to be quiet. "It's the private investigator," she said, hitting the speaker button. A man's voice filled the hotel suite, dry, cold, and sounding exactly like someone who made a living delivering terrible news. "Ms. Shaw, I've completed the title search on the primary residence at 42 Oakwood Avenue." I leaned forward. That was my house, the home I had bought with Diane back in 1982. We had paid off the mortgage 20 years ago. It was supposed to be my safest haven, my one untouchable asset. "Go ahead," Ms. Shaw said, her eyes fixed on my face. "There appears to be a discrepancy in the ownership status," the investigator said. "Mr. Vance stated the property was free and clear of any liens. However, the county recorder's office shows a major encumbrance was registered 6 months ago." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What kind of encumbrance? I asked, my voice cracking. I didn't sign anything. I haven't signed a single mortgage document in decades. The investigator paused. The document is a home equity conversion mortgage, commonly known as a reverse mortgage. It was executed on May 15th of this year. The borrower of record is Martin Vance, handled by his attorney-in-fact, Ryan Vance. The room seemed to spin around me. A reverse mortgage. I knew exactly what that was. It was a loan meant for people who owned a home but were short on cash. You traded the equity of your house for cash, and when you passed away or moved out, the bank took over the property. How much? I whispered, even though I knew the answer was going to completely break me. The lump sum payout was $500,000, the investigator said. The funds were wired straight into an account held by M&R Investments. The reality of his betrayal left me completely cold. $500,000. He had drained every single drop of equity right out of the walls. Ryan had taken the actual bricks and mortar, where my wife and I spent our entire lives, and turned them into cold, hard cash to funnel right into his shell company. Ms. Shaw thanked the private investigator and hung up the phone. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Valerie reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. I stood up and walked over to the corner of the hotel room, feeling an intense wave of nausea. I want you to understand something. The $250,000 on those credit cards was just money. The empty checking account was just money. But this reverse mortgage, this felt entirely different. This was an act of absolute violation. I closed my eyes, and for a fleeting second, I was right back there. I was standing in the foyer at 42 Oakwood Avenue. I could smell the faint scent of the lemon polish Diane used to rub onto the wooden banister. I could see the afternoon sun catching the dust motes dancing across the living room. I could hear the echoes of Ryan as a little boy running down the hallway, his small feet making a loud thumping noise against the hard oak floors. That house wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was a repository of our memories. It was the physical container of my entire life with Diane. We had planted those rose bushes in the front yard together on a rainy Sunday afternoon back in April. She had pricked her finger on a thorn, and I had kissed it to make the pain go away. From the time he was 3 until he turned 18, we marked Ryan's height on the pantry doorframe on every single birthday. Those pencil marks were still right there, faded and smudged, but they were there. Ryan knew all of this. He knew exactly how much that home meant to me. He knew my greatest wish was to find my final peace in that house. He knew that just sitting by the window in her favorite rocking chair was the only way I could still feel close to his mother. And he sold it anyway. He bartered away the memory of his mother and the safe haven of his own childhood, signing his name away for a $500,000 payout. He traded those childhood pencil marks on the doorframe for a Maserati. He exchanged the rose bushes for a first-class vacation to Dubai. He sold his mother's ghost just to fund a few months of sheer luxury. Hot, stinging tears finally spilled over my eyelids. I let out a loud, shuddering sob, a deep, hollow sound that felt like it was being ripped straight out of my chest. Leaning heavily against the wall, I slid all the way down to the floor and buried my face in my hands. I cried bitter tears for Diane. I cried for the home that didn't belong to me anymore. I cried for the boy I honestly thought I had raised. Valerie came over and sat right next to me on the floor. She didn't say a word. She didn't tell me to be strong or try to snap me out of it. She simply wrapped her arm around my shoulders and let me pour my heart out. She understood the depth of the pain. She remembered that house just as well as I did. She remembered the Christmas dinners and the loud birthday parties we all shared there. She knew exactly what had been stolen from us. He sold her, I whispered through my tears, my voice breaking. He sold Mom. He looked at that house and he didn't see a home. He just saw a pile of cash. He treated it like an ATM. The wave of overwhelming grief crashed over me for several minutes. But as my tears finally began to dry up, something else entirely began to take their place. A cold, hard sensation settled deep in the center of my chest, feeling exactly like molten iron, cooling and solidifying into stone. I remembered the look on Ryan's face when he stood in his driveway and casually told me to go home. He told me to go back to a house he had already sold out from under me to a bank. He looked me dead in the eye and smiled, knowing the entire time that he had pulled the very ground out from under my feet. It wasn't just pure greed, it was absolute cruelty. Where his conscience was supposed to be, there was nothing but a hollow void. And for 40 years, I had done nothing but feed that void with my love and my money. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sharp new blazer and took a deep, steadying breath. The air in the hotel room felt thin and recycled, but it cleared my head completely. I looked down at the geometric pattern on the carpet, noting how precise the lines were. It reminded me of the blueprints I used to draw during my engineering days. Clean lines, exact angles, perfect trajectories. You can't fix a broken system just by crying over it. You have to completely dismantle it. You have to find the point of failure and cut it out entirely. Ryan was the failure. I stood up. My knees popped loudly from the strain, but I stood perfectly straight. I looked over at Valerie and Ms. Shaw. They were both watching me with intense concern, waiting to see if I was going to fall apart completely. "He thinks he won," I said, my voice raspy but entirely steady. "He thinks because he has the paperwork and the signatures, the house is gone. He thinks I'm just going to fade away in that apartment and let the bank reclaim the property after I'm gone." I walked over to the window and looked out at the Phoenix skyline. Out there in the distance was my house. My house. Not the bank's property. Not Ryan's house. Mine. "I am taking it back," I said, turning around to face them. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what we have to do. We are not losing that house. I will pay off that mortgage, and I am going to make him pay for every single penny of it." Ms. Shaw nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting a deep, professional respect. "We can include the recovery of the real estate equity in the civil suit," she explained. "If we can prove fraud, and we absolutely can, we can petition the court to void the transaction or force the liquidation of his assets to pay off the lien. It's going to be a massive uphill battle, Mr. Vance. The bank is not going to walk away from this easily." "Then let them fight," I replied firmly. "I spent 40 years fighting gravity to put metal into the sky. I can handle a bank, and I can certainly handle a thief." Valerie stood up and smoothed down her skirt. "Good," she said. "The time for grieving is completely over. Now we get back to business. We have the numbers. We have the credit card records. We have the mortgage proof. We have more than enough to put him away for 20 years. "Not yet," I interred. "Not until I hear him admit to it with his own mouth." I looked down at my phone sitting on the table, the very device I had used to beg him for grocery money while he chose to ignore me. "I want to look him right in the eye," I said. "I want to stand directly in front of him and raise a glass. I want to see the exact moment he realizes the old man he left for dead has come back to settle the score." The blueprint of the plan was already mapping itself out perfectly in my mind. It was precise. It was calculated. It was entirely ruthless. It was the exact kind of plan an engineer creates when there is no other choice but to cut the cargo loose to save the ship. Ryan was the cargo, and I was completely prepared to cut him loose. "Let's get this party started," I said. "I want everything to be absolutely flawless. I want him to feel completely safe. I want him to feel like the king of the world, because when you think you're flying high, the fall hurts so much worse." Valerie paced across the hotel room rug, the heels of her shoes sinking into the plush fabric. She looked exactly like a tiger in a cage, measuring the distance between the bars. "We can't just slap him with a lawsuit," she said, stopping to look at me. "Not just yet." "Why not?" I asked, my voice still holding a faint rasp from the tears. "We have the bank statements. We have the credit card bills. We know he's the one who stole it." "Because he holds the power of attorney," she countered sharply, waving a legal notepad in the air. "That document is his shield, Martin. You signed it voluntarily. You gave him the legal authority to act on your behalf. If we go to court right now, he will argue that he was acting in your best interest. He'll claim the Maserati is a corporate vehicle used to manage your estate. He'll say the trip to Dubai was for international investment research. He'll say you authorized the reverse mortgage to increase your liquidity." She tossed the notepad onto the table, watching it slide across the mahogany surface and stop right by my hand. He is going to paint you as a confused, frail old man who forgot what he agreed to, she continued, and a judge might actually believe him. Ryan is charming. He's a financial professional. And you are an old man living in a rundown rental. In a courtroom, appearances matter immensely, Martin. We need more than just the numbers. We need proof of intent. We need him to say it out loud. Say what? I asked. We need him to admit that he isn't managing your money, Valerie said, leaning over the table, her blue eyes locking onto mine. We need him to admit that he took the cash and treated it as his own. We need him to brag about it. Brag about it? I shook my head. Why would he do that? He's a thief, not an idiot. Valerie smiled, a cold, thin expression that didn't even come close to reaching her eyes. Because he's a narcissist, Martin, and narcissists absolutely cannot resist an audience. They can't resist praise. If you feed his ego, he will eat until he's completely stuffed, and then he'll get careless. She pulled out a chair and sat directly across from me. Here's the plan. We are going to throw a party, a celebration. A party? I repeated in total disbelief. I want to ruin him, Valerie. I don't want to celebrate him, which is exactly why you have to do this, she insisted. You have to play the part, Martin. You have to play the loving, grateful, confused father one last time. We are going to tell him that next week would have been your 45th wedding anniversary with Diane. We are going to invite him and Megan over to your apartment for dinner. To my apartment? I asked. To that absolute hole? Yes, she said. If we do it here at the hotel, he'll get suspicious. He'll wonder where you got the money. But if we host it at your apartment, it plays right into his sense of superiority. He will walk into that dirty place in his Italian suit, feeling like a king visiting the peasants. That is exactly what we want. We want him comfortable. We want him arrogant. She reached out, picked up my phone, and slid it across the table toward me. Call him, she ordered. Tell him I left. Tell him I was causing trouble and you sent me packing back to Denver. Tell him you're so sorry for doubting him. I looked down at the phone. It felt exactly like a grenade with the pin pulled. I had to call the man who had completely robbed me and tell him I loved him. I had to apologize to the person who left me to fade away. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and pictured the rose bushes he had bartered away. I visualized the image of the empty medicine bottles. I let that cold, heavy anger settle deep in my gut. It wasn't fuel for an explosion anymore. It was fuel for a performance. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. Put it on speaker, Valerie whispered. I hit the button, and the line began to ring. Once, twice. Hello? It was Ryan. His voice sounded defensive and tight, fully expecting an argument. He assumed it was Valerie calling back. Ryan, I said, letting a slight tremor into my voice. I purposely made my breathing sound a bit heavy and labored. It's Dad. Dad, Ryan said instantly. Is Aunt Val still there? Because I am completely done talking to her. She was incredibly rude to me this morning. She's gone, son, I said. I sent her packing. A long pause followed on the other end as he processed the news. You sent her home? He asked, his tone instantly relaxing. Why? She was making me completely miserable, Ryan, I said, forcing the words past my teeth. She doesn't understand how these things work at all. She was shouting about spreadsheets and bank accounts, and it was causing my chest to hurt. I told her to leave. I told her I trust my son. I heard him let out a long, heavy breath, the sound of a man who believed he had just dodged a bullet. I'm really glad you did that, Dad, he said, his tone instantly shifting back to that smooth, patronizing warmth. Aunt Val has always been so dramatic. She was just trying to drive a wedge between us. I am doing everything I can to protect your future, and she just doesn't get it. I know, son, I said. I know, and I want to make it up to you. I want to apologize for this morning. You don't need to apologize, Dad, he said magnanimously. It wasn't your fault. You're getting older. It's incredibly easy to get confused when people are shouting numbers at you. Yeah, I'm getting old, I echoed, swallowing the bitter taste rising in my throat. Listen, Ryan, next Saturday would have been my 45th anniversary with your mother. I don't want to be alone. I want to host a family dinner. Just you, Megan, and me at the apartment. At the apartment? He repeated. And even over the phone, I could hear the smirk in his voice. Dad, we can go somewhere much nicer. I can take you out for a steak. No, I said firmly. I want to be at home. I want to feel close to your mother. Please, Ryan, let me buy you dinner. I still have some of that cash you gave me. I'll order some Mexican food. It'll be a celebration. I want to formally thank you for everything you've done to manage the estate. He hesitated. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was thinking about the smell of my apartment. He was thinking about his expensive shoes stepping onto my dirty floors. But he was also thinking about his immense ego. He wanted the gratitude. He wanted to be acknowledged as the savior of the family. All right, Dad, he finally agreed. We'll be there Saturday at 7. Thank you, son, I said. Thank you. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking so badly the device clattered loudly against the table. I felt completely dirty, like I had just taken a swim in a sewer. He bit, Valerie said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. He took the bait completely. Martin, he thinks he won. He thinks you're right back under his thumb. He said I was confused, I whispered. He said I was getting old. Good, Valerie said. Let him think exactly that. Let him believe you are weak, because when we drop the hammer on him, he won't see it coming at all. She turned to face Ms. Shaw, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, taking everything in. Is the paperwork ready? Valerie asked. Ms. Shaw nodded, opening her briefcase and pulling out a thick manila folder. I have the revocation of the power of attorney ready to go, she said. It will strip Ryan of all his authority instantly upon signature. I also have the draft for the civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and fraud. Most importantly, I have the emergency asset freeze order ready. She spread the documents out across the table. They looked like ordinary pieces of paper, but to me, they were weapons. On Saturday night, we will have a notary standing by in a van just outside the apartment, Ms. Shaw explained. The second he admits it, the moment we have it on tape, you sign these documents. First thing Monday morning, we file them electronically with the court. By the time he wakes up, his accounts will be frozen. His credit cards will be deactivated. He will be completely locked out. And the house? I asked. What about my house? Ms. Shaw looked at me with a serious expression. The house is more complicated. But if we can prove the reverse mortgage was obtained through fraudulent means, and we can ask the court to void the transaction entirely. It'll be a fight, but we have plenty of ammunition. Valerie walked over to the window, looking out over the city. He's going to show up to that dinner, she said softly. He'll be wearing his expensive watch and his custom suit. He'll bring along his wife, who gets paid $25,000 a month to consult. They will sit at your table, eat your food, and believe they are absolutely untouchable. She turned around to look at me. You have to stay strong, Martin. You have to keep the mask on until the very last second. Can you do that? Can you look him in the eye and smile while holding the knife? I thought back to those freezing nights. I thought about the hunger. I thought about the sheer terror of dying alone because I couldn't afford a pill that cost less than his lunch. Looking at my sister, I didn't need to fake the absolute steel in my voice. I can do it, I said. I spent 40 years calculating the stress points of metal. I know exactly how much pressure it takes to break something, and I am going to break him. Perfect, Valerie said. Then let's plan the menu. I want to make sure this is a meal he will remember for the rest of his life. We spent the remainder of the night meticulously going over every single detail. Every word I would say, every hint I would drop. We weren't just planning a dinner party, we were orchestrating a downfall. That night, as I lay in the clean hotel bed staring up at the ceiling, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the architect of his ruin. And Saturday couldn't arrive fast enough. Saturday evening finally arrived, bringing a heavy, humid heat that seemed to press down on the thin walls of my apartment. Inside, the transformation was completely surreal. Valerie had hired high-end catering from El Toro, one of the most expensive Mexican restaurants in the city. The wonderful aromas of slow-roasted pork and fresh cilantro were fighting a losing battle against the persistent smell of mildew and old plumbing embedded in the drywall. It was a bizarre scene. We had set up a shaky white plastic folding table right in the middle of the room, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $20. But on top of that cheap table sat silver chafing dishes fit for a wedding reception, gleaming under the harsh light of the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. I looked over at Bill and Sandra, who were sitting stiffly in a pair of folding chairs. They were my neighbors from down the hall, the kind souls who had shared their meager dinners with me when I was starving. I had told them this was a reconciliation dinner, a celebration of family unity. They had no idea they were actually acting as the jury in the kangaroo court I was setting up for my son. Dressed in their absolute best Sunday clothes, they looked incredibly uncomfortable, their eyes darting around the room as they felt the tension vibrating in the air like a live wire. And then the knock came. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a sharp, authoritative pounding that sounded exactly like a landlord coming to collect overdue rent. I straightened the lapels of my dark new suit, took a deep breath, my lungs rattling slightly in my chest, and opened the door. Ryan and Megan stood there looking like royalty inspecting a colony. The visual contrast was jarring. Megan wore a champagne-colored silk slip dress that flowed like water. It was completely backless and looked entirely ridiculous for a dinner in a rundown apartment. The strappy heels on her feet cost more than every single piece of furniture in the room combined. The moment the door opened, her immediate reaction wasn't to smile or offer a greeting. She wrinkled her nose, a tiny instinctive flinch, a physical rejection of the smell of the place. Ryan stood right beside her in a navy blue custom Italian suit, checking his Rolex, the $25,000 watch bought with my pension. He looked at me, his eyes lingering on my new suit for a split second with a flash of confusion, but he quickly covered it up with an oversized fake smile. "Dad," he said, stepping into the room. He didn't offer a hug. Instead, he reached out and gave my shoulder a heavy pat, a patronizing gesture that felt far more like a claim of ownership than an expression of affection. "You look good, much better than last week." Before I could even reply, Valerie walked out from the kitchen area. She was completely unrecognizable. The sharp, iron-willed forensic accountant who had mapped out this entire operation was gone. In her place stood a slouching, flustered old woman wearing a shapeless, moth-eaten beige cardigan that smelled faintly of mothballs. Her hair was teased into a frizzy halo, and her glasses sat crookedly on her nose. She looked entirely non-threatening. She looked exactly like the confused, irrelevant relic Ryan wanted her to be. "Oh, look who it is!" Valerie cried out cheerfully, her voice rising into a trembling soprano. "Our golden boy. Ryan, come on in. Come in. And Megan, you look just like a movie star. Watch your step, dear. The floor is a little uneven right there." Valerie moved with a manic, nervous energy, grabbing a bottle of high-end tequila she had purchased. It wasn't cheap stuff. It was a $200 bottle. She poured generous amounts into plastic cups because I didn't own enough real glassware. "Here, take these. You must be absolutely parched," she said, pressing the cups into their hands. "A toast to family and to making amends." Ryan took the cup, glancing down at the plastic with a look of quiet amusement. He took a sip, his eyebrows raising slightly at the quality of the liquor. "Thank you, Aunt Val," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm really glad to see you're feeling better. Dad mentioned you were having a hard time grasping the portfolio strategy. It can certainly be incredibly complex." Valerie nodded frantically, playing the part to absolute perfection. "Oh, I know," she said, topping off his cup before he had even finished his first sip. "I'm just an old bookkeeper from the Jurassic era. These new markets, all the derivatives and trusts, it's completely Greek to me. Martin is so incredibly lucky to have you, Ryan. I was just telling Bill and Sandra how brilliant you are. Most kids would just shove their parents into a home, but you're managing millions of dollars. It's a massive burden to carry." I watched as Ryan practically inflated right before my eyes. The flattery hit him like a drug. He loosened his tie and leaned back against the counter, surveying the room. The disgust in his eyes was replaced by a look of benevolent charity, like a lord looking down at his peasants. He took a heavy gulp of the tequila. "It really is a burden, Aunt Val," he admitted, his voice dropping into a confidential baritone. "People don't understand the pressure. The market has been insanely volatile lately. I spend hours every single day shifting assets around just to shield Dad from tax liabilities. It's a full-time job." Megan stood right beside him, sipping her drink, her free hand flying across her phone screen. She looked completely bored and detached, as if she were simply waiting for an Uber to rescue her from a terrible party. She barely acknowledged Bill and Sandra, who sat quietly holding their plates of tacos, watching the entire performance with wide eyes. "Have a seat, come on, eat up, everyone," Valerie urged, her hands fluttering in the air as she piled tacos onto paper plates and handed them over to Ryan and Megan. Since we didn't have enough chairs to go around, Ryan had to sit right on the edge of the mattress. Balancing the plate on his knees, he looked completely ridiculous in his $2,000 suit. But he was already so drunk on the constant flattery and high-end tequila that he didn't even notice. I sat across from him in my usual shaky chair, folding my hands over my lap to hide my clenched fists. My fingernails were digging so deep into my palms that they left painful marks. I just watched my son eat the food I paid for, drink the liquor I paid for, and wear the watch bought with my money, all while offering fake smiles to neighbors he would normally never look at in real life. The hot rage inside of me had officially turned into a cold, solid block of ice. Valerie continued to hover over them like the perfect hostess, playing the part of the clueless aunt flawlessly. "You know, Ryan," she said, pouring even more tequila into his half-empty cup, "the other day I was looking through some of Martin's old paperwork from his time at Lockheed. He worked so incredibly hard for that pension. It's such a massive relief knowing it's in your hands, growing every day. With your brilliance, I bet you've already doubled it by now, haven't you?" Ryan let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed straight through the thin walls of the apartment. "Doubled it?" he scoffed, taking a massive gulp of his drink. "Aunt Val, in this economic climate, just preserving the capital is a victory in itself. But yes, we have seen substantial growth. Very substantial. We are building a real legacy for Dad that can be passed down for generations. Legacy." The word hung heavily in the air, dripping with pure irony. His idea of a legacy was a leased Maserati and a closet full of designer handbags, while my actual legacy was sitting in a run-down rental apartment that probably violated 3 different health codes. The alcohol was hitting him incredibly fast. He wasn't used to drinking on an empty stomach, and within 20 minutes, he had downed the equivalent of 3 straight shots of tequila. His cheeks were flushed bright red, his gestures became wild and animated, and he felt completely untouchable. Surrounded by elderly and low-income folks, the 2 groups of people he felt most superior to, his ego was soaring. Megan finished her drink, and without even bothering to look at Valerie, held her empty cup out for a refill. Valerie filled it up instantly, her face twisted into a mask of almost pathetic admiration. "You 2 are just the ultimate power couple," Valerie gushed. "Look at you. The clothes, that gorgeous car outside. Martin told me all about the Maserati. Managing an estate while maintaining a luxury vehicle like that must cost an absolute fortune." Ryan waved his hand dismissively. "It's a business necessity," he said, his speech just the slightest bit slurred. "In my world, image is absolutely everything. You have to look successful to be successful. Clients trust a winner. I'm doing this for the family. It's all part of a larger strategy." I glanced over at Bill and Sandra. They were quietly exchanging looks. They were simple, hard-working people, but they weren't stupid. They could see the jarring contrast right in front of them. A son dressed in a custom luxury suit, and a father wearing clothes that were falling apart. They were looking right at the living lie sitting on the edge of that mattress. Valerie stepped into the very center of the room, holding her own cup now. The time had come. The trap was set perfectly, and the prey was fat, happy, and incredibly drunk. I caught her gaze through her thick, crooked glasses. Her sharp blue eyes looked like laser beams. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. That was the signal. The performance was officially over, and the takedown was about to begin. Valerie tapped the edge of her cup with a plastic fork. The sharp, crisp sound cut right through the chatter in the humid room, sounding exactly like a judge's gavel striking a block. She stood up slowly, leaning heavily against the table as if her legs could barely support her. She scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the water stains on the ceiling, the peeling paint by the window, and finally landing on Ryan, who was now flushed and sweating from the tequila. "I'd like to propose one final toast," Valerie announced, her voice trembling with what sounded like intense emotion, but I knew it was cold, hard calculation. "To Martin, my brother, a man who designed navigation systems for fighter jets, a man who worked 60 hours a week for 40 years. She turned to face me, and for a fraction of a second the mask slipped. I saw a look of fierce, protective love in her eyes before the confused old woman persona returned. "But I have to admit," she said, turning back to Ryan, her brow furrowing into an expression of exaggerated bewilderment, "I'm just so terribly confused, Ryan. You say the portfolio is growing. You say you're protecting his legacy, but just look at this place." She gestured broadly to the rundown room around her. "Martin's pension is $15,000 a month. That is more than most families make in 3 months. So why is my brother living like a refugee? Why did I find a red utility disconnect notice in his trash? Why is he eating expired yogurt? If you are managing his money so brilliantly, why on earth is he living in absolute poverty?" The air in the room shifted instantly. The happy, drunken atmosphere evaporated in a heartbeat. Bill and Sandra, who had been quietly eating their tacos, stopped chewing completely. They looked from Valerie to Ryan, sensing the immediate danger in the room. Ryan froze. The arrogant smile slid right off his face. He set his cup down on the mattress, spilling tequila onto the sheet. He stood up, his body swaying slightly. The alcohol had made him careless, but it had also made him incredibly defensive. He felt personally attacked, his absolute authority questioned in front of an audience. "It's complicated, Aunt Val," he snapped, his voice losing every bit of its smooth cover. "I told you cash flow is tight. Dad spends money on frivolous things. You don't see the bills I have to take care of. He's incredibly high maintenance." I looked up at him from my shaky chair, the sheer injustice burning in my throat. "I only buy my medicine, Ryan," I said, my voice quiet but piercingly clear. "Just medicine and food. That's it. I haven't bought a new shirt in 5 years." Ryan whipped around to face me, his eyes burning with a volatile mix of guilt and drunken rage. "You don't understand the market, Dad. You don't understand liquidity. I am building something for this family. I am securing our future." "But what about Martin's present?" Valerie pressed, her voice turning razor sharp. "What about his dignity? Where is the money actually going, Ryan? It doesn't just disappear into thin air." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, messing up his perfect style. He looked trapped. He glanced over at Megan for support, but she was completely glued to her phone, totally ignoring him and the disaster unfolding around them. He desperately wanted validation. He wanted someone to tell him he was right, that he was the smart one, the ultimate provider. He turned back to face Valerie, his chest heaving. His intense narcissism was bubbling over, completely shattering his self-control. He could not handle being viewed as incompetent. He couldn't stand being seen as a failure. He had to be the hero, even if he was actually the villain. "It didn't disappear," he yelled, his voice echoing off the thin walls. "It's exactly where it needs to be. It's an investment in branding, in our image, an investment in us." "In you, you mean," Valerie corrected softly. "Yes, in us." Ryan gestured wildly between himself and Megan. "We are the legacy. We are the ones who have to carry this family name forward. Dad had his time. Now it's our time. You want to know where the money is? You really want to know?" He looked around the room, his eyes wild, daring anyone to challenge him. He wanted to shock us. He wanted to crush us with his superiority. "My father's money is a family asset," he roared, pointing a finger directly at my chest. "And as the manager, I decide where it's needed most. I decide who is worthy of it." He reached out, grabbed Megan's hand and pulled her out of her chair. She looked thoroughly annoyed, stumbling slightly in her high heels. "I gave all of my father's money to my wife." He screamed the words out, and they hung in the humid air like a heavy weight. "I gave it to her because she actually knows how to use it. She knows how to live. Dad would just hoard it all. We make it move. We actually live our lives. That is what money is for." The silence that followed was absolute. It carried a heavy physical weight. The fork slipped from Bill's hand, clattering loudly against his paper plate. Sandra threw her hands over her mouth in shock. Even Megan looked up, her eyes wide, realizing her husband had just crossed a line he could never walk back from. He had said the quiet part out loud. He had just confessed to theft in front of 4 witnesses. Ryan stood there, panting heavily, a defiant smirk plastered across his face. He honestly believed he had won the argument. He thought his bold declaration of power had completely silenced his critics. "I mean," he added, trying and failing miserably to soften the blow, "I handle it through her for family expenses. Megan is incredibly good at budgeting." Valerie let out a sound. It was a laugh, but it held absolutely no humor. It was a cold, sharp bark that sent a chill straight down my spine. "Incredibly good at budgeting," Valerie echoed. And then the transformation happened. It was like watching a butterfly crawl back into a cocoon, but in reverse. It was terrifying. Valerie stood up perfectly straight. The slouch in her spine completely vanished. She reached up, tore the crooked glasses off her face, and slammed them onto the table. Grabbing the top button of the moth-eaten beige cardigan, she ripped it open in one swift, violent motion, letting it slide off her shoulders and drop to the dirty floor like shed skin. Underneath, she was wearing a sharp, tailored navy blue business suit that fit her flawlessly, radiating total authority and competence. She straightened her lapels, her entire posture projecting a dangerous, commanding energy. She wasn't a confused aunt anymore. She was a forensic accountant who had sent multiple executives to federal prison. "Oh, she's incredibly good, is she?" Valerie said, her voice dropping into a cold, commanding register. She reached deep into the large tote bag she had brought along and pulled out a thick stack of papers, slamming them down onto the flimsy plastic table with enough force to make the bowls jump. Megan's face went completely pale, the color draining from her cheeks so fast it looked like she had just seen a ghost. She stared down at the documents, instantly recognizing the black American Express logo on the cover page. How did you get those?" Megan whispered, her voice barely audible. Valerie ignored her entirely. She picked up the top page and held it up like an indictment. $12,000 at Chanel, Valerie read, her voice booming with absolute authority. $8,000 at Louis Vuitton, and $20,000 for a first-class trip to Dubai. Is that budgeting, Megan? Is that how you manage family expenses? Ryan took a step back, stumbling slightly. His arrogance was cracking, replaced by a creeping terror. You can't look at those, he stammered. "Those are private. I have power of attorney." Valerie threw the page directly at him. It fluttered through the air, slapping against his chest. "Or maybe," Valerie continued, turning her laser-like gaze back to Megan, "you're so good at budgeting that you advised your husband to take out a reverse mortgage on his father's fully paid-off home. A house with 40 years of memories. You advised him to strip $500,000 of equity out of it just so you could lease a Maserati." She picked up another document, a copy of the mortgage deed, and hurled it onto the table right in front of Megan. "Do you love driving that car, Megan?" Valerie asked, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you love those leather seats? Do they feel good against your skin while your father-in-law sleeps on a mattress on the floor because he had to sell his bed just to buy groceries?" Megan was shaking all over now. Her hands trembled so badly that her phone slipped from her grip, clattering loudly against the floor. "Ryan," she gasped, grabbing his arm. "Ryan, do something. She knows. She knows everything." Ryan looked from the papers to Valerie, and finally over to me. His eyes were wide and frantic. He looked exactly like a trapped animal, realizing far too late that the bait was poisoned. "Aunt Val, you have this all wrong," he tried to argue, his voice sounding thin and weak. "Those are investments. M&R Investments. It's a legitimate holding company. Valerie laughed again, pulling out her phone and tapping the screen. M&R Investments, she said. Megan and Ryan, you didn't even try to hide it. You named the shell company after yourselves. That isn't investing, Ryan. That's embezzlement. And I am a CPA, you idiot. Did you honestly think I couldn't follow a wire transfer? Did you think a spreadsheet you typed up in 10 minutes was going to fool me? She pressed play on her phone, and Ryan's voice filled the room, small but unmistakably clear. I gave all of my father's money to my wife. Valerie held the phone up high. I have it all, Ryan, she said. The bank records, the credit card bills, the proof of mortgage fraud, and now a recorded confession of your theft in front of witnesses. She pointed directly at Bill and Sandra, who were staring at Ryan with undisguised disgust. Say hello to the jury, Valerie said. Ryan looked at the neighbors. He looked at the documents. He looked at me. For the first time in his entire life, he looked incredibly small. The expensive suit seemed to hang loosely off his frame, and the Rolex on his wrist looked heavy. The illusion of the successful golden boy was shattered, leaving nothing but a thief standing in a run-down apartment. Megan let out a whimpering cry like a wounded animal. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed into her folding chair, burying her face in her hands. My shopping records, she sobbed into her palms. My reputation. Everyone is going to know. Valerie leaned over the table, getting right in her face. Oh, honey, Valerie whispered. Your reputation is the absolute least of your worries. You should be worried about your freedom, because no matter how much Chanel you wear, grand theft doesn't look good on anyone. The room fell quiet, save for Megan's quiet sobbing and my son's heavy, ragged breathing. He stood there swaying, looking at the absolute wreckage of his life, and I sat in my chair, straightening my sharp new tie, feeling the cold, heavy weight of actual justice settle over my shoulders. The trap had sprung, and it had caught them perfectly. The atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to hostility in the span of a single heartbeat. Ryan stared down at the pile of incriminating documents laid out on the plastic table. His eyes darted back and forth like a cornered rat looking for an escape route, taking in the credit card bills, the mortgage deed, and the undeniable proof of his actions spread out under the harsh glare of the bare bulb. Panic completely overwhelmed his arrogance. The alcohol that had made him feel invincible just moments ago now fueled a reckless, desperate aggression. Give me those, he roared, his face contorting into a mask of pure ugliness. He lunged forward, throwing his weight against the flimsy table, his hands clawing wildly for the stack of papers. He wanted to rip them apart. He wanted to destroy the evidence, believing that if he tore up the paper, the truth would disappear with it. He thought he could bully us one last time, using his size to intimidate an older woman and a frail old man. But he never even touched the documents. Before his fingers could graze the paper, the door to my apartment was thrown open with a force that rattled the frame. A man stepped inside. He wasn't a neighbor, and he wasn't a friend. He was a massive wall of muscle dressed in a sharp black suit that practically stretched across his broad shoulders. He was the private security detail Ms. Shaw had hired, and he had been standing silently in the hallway, waiting for this exact moment. Ryan slammed right into the man like a bird hitting a windshield. The bodyguard didn't even blink. He simply raised a massive hand, planting it firmly against Ryan's chest and stopping his momentum instantly. It was entirely effortless, and it was deeply humiliating. Ryan was thrown backward, tripping over his own expensive shoes and landing heavily on the dirty floor. He scrambled backward, looking up at the wall of muscle that now stood between him and the table. "Step away from the evidence, sir," the bodyguard said, his voice deep and entirely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a professional, used to handling unruly individuals. "Please take a seat." Ryan panted heavily, clutching his chest where the guard had pushed him. He looked at the man, then at Valerie, and finally over to me. The terror in his eyes was absolute. He finally realized this wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a tactical operation, and he was completely outmatched. I stood up from my shaky chair. For months I had needed to use the armrests just to push myself up, waiting for my knees to stop trembling. But tonight, I stood up in one smooth, fluid motion. The adrenaline rushing through my veins had burned away my weakness. I felt tall and I felt strong. With calm, deliberate fingers, I buttoned my sharp new suit jacket. I walked around the table, my pace slow and measured. The sound of my polished shoes hitting the linoleum was the only noise in the room. I walked past Megan, who was still crying into her hands, and past the bodyguard, who nodded respectfully and stepped aside to let me through. I stopped right in front of the table where Valerie had laid down the final document. It was a single white page, looking crisp and clean against the stained plastic surface. At the top, in bold black letters, it read, "Revocation of Power of Attorney." Sitting right beside it was a heavy, expensive fountain pen that Valerie had placed there. It was my old pen, the one I had used at Lockheed Martin to sign off on engineering blueprints for 30 years. She had tracked it down and bought it back from the pawn shop. I looked down at Ryan. He was still sitting on the floor looking up at me. He looked pathetic. The Italian suit was covered in dust. His tie was completely askew, and the smell of expensive tequila was seeping from his pores. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Dad, please don't do this. You're confused. Aunt Val has brainwashed you. You need me. Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to manage the trusts? You can't handle this on your own." I looked into his eyes, truly studying him. I tried to find the little boy I used to take to baseball games, or the young man whose graduation had made me so incredibly proud. But they were gone, swallowed up by greed, replaced by a stranger who would barter away his father's life just to buy a car. "I am not confused, Ryan," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it filled the small room completely. It was the exact voice I used when leading teams of engineers through critical launch sequences, a voice of absolute command. "I don't have dementia," I continued, leaning over the table so he could see the total clarity in my eyes. "I'm a rocket scientist. I calculate trajectories for a living. I see the patterns other people miss. I see you perfectly, Ryan. For the first time in years, I see exactly who you are." I reached out and picked up the fountain pen. It felt cool and familiar in my hand, exactly like a weapon. "I trusted you," I said, the words carrying the full weight of my heartbreak. "I handed my life over to you. I handed your mother's memory over to you. I gave you the keys to the kingdom because I thought you were a protector." Ryan reached a hand out to me, a desperate, pleading gesture. "Dad, I love you. I did this for us." "No," I cut him off. "You did it for yourself. And you thought because I loved you, I was blind. You thought because I was old, I was stupid." I placed the tip of the pen on the signature line. "But trust is a fragile thing, son," I said. "It's like glass. Once you shatter it, you can never glue it back together. And you completely pulverized it. That trust died the night I called you begging for my medicine, and you let it go straight to voicemail." I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. Martin Vance. I signed it with a sharp, bold flourish, a strong signature without a single trace of hesitation. It was the signature of a man taking his entire life back, closing a door forever. The scratch of the pen against the paper was incredibly loud in the silence, sounding exactly like a body bag being zipped shut. I capped the pen and set it down. It was done. Ryan let out a sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated despair. He knew exactly what that signature meant. It meant the faucet was turned off. The power was completely gone. He was no longer the master of the universe. He was just an unemployed thief drowning in massive debt. Valerie stepped forward, holding up her phone, the screen glowing brightly. "It's submitted," she announced, her voice filled with triumph. "I just forwarded the audio file to Ms. Shaw. Every single word you said tonight, Ryan. The confession about giving the money to your wife, the bragging, the admission of guilt. It's all recorded and backed up on 3 different secure cloud servers." She tapped the screen again. "I just texted the legal team. They are electronically filing the emergency motion right now. By 8 tomorrow morning, every single asset tied to either of your names will be completely frozen. Your bank accounts, your investment portfolios, even that ridiculous offshore account you set up in the Cayman Islands. We found it all, Ryan. We tracked everything. Megan lifted her head from her hands, her mascara running down her face in dark streaks. Frozen? She gasped. But I have a hair appointment tomorrow. I have bills to pay. The lease on the car. The car is gone, honey, Valerie said, looking at her with cold pity. Martin was paying the lease. Martin just canceled the payments. The repo man for that Maserati will be looking for you before lunch. And as for your hair appointment, I suggest you learn how to do it yourself. You two are going to need to save every penny for a very good criminal defense lawyer. Ryan struggled back up to his feet. He looked erratic. He looked dangerous. But the bodyguard took a single step forward, cracking his knuckles, and Ryan shrank right back down. He gave me one final look. There was no love left in his eyes anymore. There was only hatred, pure, highly concentrated hatred, the kind a parasite has when it's forcibly ripped away from its host. You old fool, he hissed, spit flying from his lips. You think you won. You think you're smart. You're just a pathetic, lonely old man. You're gonna die all alone in this absolute dump. I looked around the apartment. It really was a dump. He was right about that. But it was my dump, and for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of dying here. No, son, I said calmly. I won't die alone because I have family. Real family. I looked over at Valerie. She stood there in her sharp suit, holding her phone like a shield, looking at me with immense pride. I looked at Bill and Sandra, who were nodding along in total solidarity. And as for this place, I added, I'm leaving. I'm going to buy back my house, my real house. But you are more than welcome to stay here. I paid the rent through the end of the month. Consider it the very last dime I will ever spend on you. I turned my back on him. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but at the same time, it was the easiest. I walked toward the door and the bodyguard held it open for me. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving my son and his wife in the dirty nest they had built for me. As the door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Ryan screaming, I took a deep, full breath. The hallway smelled like old cooking and stale carpet, but to me, it tasted like absolute freedom. I straightened my cuffs, held my head high, and walked away. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a man who had just survived a war. The wheels of justice turn slowly, but the wheels of financial ruin move incredibly fast. 6 months have passed since that dinner party in my cramped little apartment. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of a stolen life being dismantled and put back together. Monday morning hit Ryan and Megan like a sledgehammer. Ms. Shaw had kept her promise. By the time they woke up, the asset freeze was fully in effect. I heard that Megan tried to buy a latte at Starbucks, and her card was declined. It was a petty victory, but I savored it. It was the first crack in their illusion. The legal process was brutal and highly efficient. We gave them a clear choice. They could face criminal charges for elder abuse, wire fraud, and grand theft, which carried a mandatory sentence of 10 to 15 years in prison. Or they could agree to a strict civil restitution plan. They chose the latter. They chose their freedom, but it cost them absolutely everything they owned. The Scottsdale mansion was sold off in a fire sale to pay off the reverse mortgage on my home. The equity they thought they had built up completely vanished into legal fees and penalties. The Maserati was repossessed before the sun even set on that first Monday. The designer clothes, the watches, the handbags, all of it was liquidated by a court-appointed trustee. I didn't want a single dime of the money from those items. I just wanted them gone. I wanted every single trace of their theft erased. Their marriage didn't survive the poverty. The second the bank accounts hit zero, Megan filed for divorce. It turns out her love for Ryan was directly tied to his ability to fund her lifestyle. She moved back to Atlanta to live with her parents, leaving Ryan entirely alone to face the wreckage. I heard she blamed the whole thing on Ryan, claiming she was just an innocent bystander in his scheme. It was a lie, of course, but Ryan was too broken to fight back. As for Ryan, my son, the golden boy who once thought he was too good to step on my floors, I saw him last week. I didn't speak to him, but I saw him. He's working at a home improvement store on the east side of the city. He was wearing an orange apron, standing behind a cash register, scanning items for customers who didn't even look him in the eye. He looked old. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He's living in a studio apartment not far from where I used to stay. He takes the bus to work, and he has to budget every single penny just to buy lunch. The universe truly has a poetic sense of humor. He forced me to live like a beggar, and now he is learning firsthand exactly what that feels like. Seeing him like that doesn't make me happy. I feel a quiet, heavy sadness. But I also feel a sense of peace, because I know that he is finally learning the lessons I failed to teach him when he was a boy. He is learning the value of a dollar earned through honest work. He is learning that actions have consequences. I'm no longer in that dark apartment. Right now, I am sitting on the porch at 42 Oakwood Avenue. My house, my real house. It took months of legal battles and a massive amount of money to undo the reverse mortgage, but we did it. The bank has been paid off, and the deed is securely back in my name. I spent a whole week just walking from room to room, touching the walls. I hired a contractor to fix all the neglect. The floors have been refinished, the walls have been repainted, and that stale air is completely gone, replaced by the scent of lemon polish and fresh air. I look out at the front yard, and the rose bushes are in full bloom. They are a vibrant explosion of red against the green leaves. It took me 3 days to prune them, feed them, and bring them back to life. They are resilient, just like me. Valerie is sitting in the rocking chair right next to me. She comes to visit every single weekend now. She's holding a glossy travel brochure. Alaska, she says, pointing to a photo of a glacier. Peak season starts next month, Martin. The upper deck suites have balconies where you can sit and watch the whales. I take the brochure from her hand. I have my money back now, my pension and my recovered assets. I can afford the suite. I can afford the first-class ticket. Let's do it, I say. Let's book it today. Valerie smiles and pours us both a cup of tea using Diane's favorite fine china cups. It's Earl Grey. We sit in a comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, the kind of silence shared by soldiers who survived a tough campaign together. I reach into my pocket and pull out a small framed photo of Diane. It was taken on our 40th anniversary. She's smiling that warm, gentle smile that used to light up my whole world. I run my thumb over the glass. Sometimes I talk to her. I tell her about the roses, about Valerie, and I tell her about Ryan, too. I lost a son, Diane, I whisper to the photo. I lost the boy we raised, but I think I found the man I was always meant to be. I got my spine back. I got my dignity back. I look out at the empty driveway where Ryan used to park when he came to visit. It's completely clear now, but it doesn't feel lonely. It feels clean. Sometimes the most profound lessons a parent can teach a child are the most painful ones. I enabled him for far too long. I let him think that love meant freedom from consequences, that I was a resource instead of a person. By stopping him, I didn't just save myself. I might have saved his soul, too. He has a very long road ahead of him, but at least now he's walking it on his own 2 feet. I take a sip of my tea. It's hot and sweet. The air is cooling down and the street lamps are starting to flicker on. But this time, I'm not afraid of the dark. I have my home. I have my sister. And after 2 long years, I finally have my life back. I lean back in my chair, close my eyes, and listen to the wind rustling through the rose bushes. My name is Martin Vance. I'm a senior engineer. I am a survivor. And tomorrow, I'm booking a ticket to Alaska. Financial abuse is a silent epidemic that thrives in the shadows of trust and family obligation. It often comes with a smile and a hug from the people we love the most, which makes it incredibly hard to see until it's almost too late. The biggest lesson here is that trust is not a financial strategy. No matter how much you love someone, you must verify where your money is going and maintain control over your own assets. Setting boundaries and demanding transparency isn't a sign of distrust. It's an act of self-preservation. Never let your love for your family blind you to their actions, because real love will never demand that you sacrifice your dignity or your security. If this story touched you, or if it made you think about your own situation, Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps out more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to protect yourself from family? Let me know in the comments below. Take care of yourselves and never be afraid to stand up for what belongs to you.